No Man's Land is a no-holds-barred analysis of St. Lucia's current political environment by Anderson Reynolds. This timely dissection of the anatomy of St. Lucia's body politic by Dr. Reynolds is certain to ruffle a few feathers. Make sure you pick up a copy.
No Man's Land is a sword that cuts and pierces both sides of the political realm.
Anderson Reynolds' latest publication, No Man's Land, a political introspection of St. Lucia, is filled with thunder and probably lightning bolts as well.
I heartily embrace Dr. Reynolds' No Man's Land. It is an unapologetic, ferocious, take no prisoners masterpiece. In Dr. Reynolds, St. Lucia has obviously produced another writer of the caliber, or of even deeper essence, the Nobel laureate V.S. Naipaul.
Reporting.
In this report from Amani Marthra, a local author discusses his latest book, which he says is a must-read before St. Lucians head to the polls in what is expected to be a hotly contested election.
No Man's Land, the latest publication by St. Lucian author Dr. Anderson Reynolds, has been described as a no-holds-barred analysis of current socio-political issues facing the country. The Vieux-Fort native says the 219-page book was birthed out of his 2020 articles, Vieux-Fort Political Leadership Crisis and the Alan Chasney Ultimatum. Both pieces stirred negative reviews, particularly among Labour Party supporters.
The SLP may want us to believe that Chasney is the biggest problem facing St. Lucia faces, or COVID is the biggest problem. But the book is saying, no, these are not the biggest problems St. Lucia faces. St. Lucia faces a very high unemployment rate, that even when the economy is growing strongly, our unemployment rate is very high, over 20% unemployment rate, and for young people, it's over 30%. We face a perennial unemployment rate of over 20% that never seems to go away, no matter how well the economy is doing. It is never presented in that way. We are made to believe, well, we will establish a hotel or two and this will take care of our unemployment rate. But when we do establish a hotel or two, the unemployment rate doesn't go away.
Another major issue which the book tackles is the age-old concern of the urgent need for constitutional reform.
We keep completing our political system and so on and so on. And we keep, like a yo-yo, we keep voting in one party, kicking them out, voting another party. But that doesn't change how business is done, because we have a constitution, we have a political structure that lends itself to corruption, that gives undue power to cabinet ministers and the prime minister.
The author stresses that the work is not centered on partisan concerns, but rather aims to provide objective criticism and foster dialogue on issues of national development, which have been ignored by politicians on both sides of the divide.
I think it is probably more hard-hitting, more critical, maybe more contentious, especially given our current political environment, given elections is up and coming. A lot of what we have now are people, what we call party hacks. They're writing is in support of their party. And if they are of that party, no matter what that party does, they will never criticize that party. And if it is not their party that's in power, then anything that government does, they are full of criticism for that government. So the criticism, the writing, a lot of it is very unbalanced, very subjective, and very self-serving. So it's important to have this kind of writing where there is a balanced view, an objective view, and where everything that is said there is evidence to back it up.
In keeping with COVID-19 protocols, Reynolds will host a virtual launch which will be streamed on Facebook and YouTube on Thursday, February 11th at 6:30 p.m. Copies of No Man's Land are available from Jacko Productions in Beaufort and on Amazon, as well as various local outlets, including M&C Bridge Street, TNM at the Beaufort Plaza, and Noah's Arcade at the Urinora Airport. For Choice News Now, Amani Matre reporting.
In its effort to continue.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. I am Esther Matthew, your host for this evening's program. I am very pleased to be here this evening for what I would call a groundbreaking phenomenon, the launching of Dr. Reynolds' latest novel, No Man's Land. From just what I've read in this novel, it is indeed a thought-provoking and a dégaging, if you did not hear me clearly, a dégaging of a small island political system. With me are two very, very important people who played instrumental roles in the writing of the novel. And with no further ado, we would like you to view this little video clip about this novel. So we would like you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the clips.
No Man's Land is a no-holds-barred analysis of St. Lucia's current political environment by Anderson Reynolds. This timely dissection of the anatomy of St. Lucia's body politic by Dr. Reynolds is certain to ruffle a few feathers. Make sure you pick up a copy.
No Man's Land by Dr. Anderson Reynolds. A sword that pierces and cuts through both sides of the political realm. It digs deep and bleeds out the truth, which flows into a stream of solution. Well put together, masterpiece. A must-read by every high school, college, tertiary, university student. Those that are interested in politics and those that study political science and are interested in history. I say it's a must-read. Get yours today.
The failure to solve the nation's most pressing problems is more a matter of will and desire than a matter of a lack of resources, know-how, ideas, development plans.
I heartily embrace Dr. Reynolds' No Man's Land. It is an unapologetic, ferocious, take-no-prisoners masterpiece. It lashes out brutally and mercilessly at all perceived and real purveyors of economic and political corruption, whose economic extraction account for St. Lucia's persistent poverty, perennial and stagnant high unemployment, and the resulting protracted underdevelopment. No Man's Land is the personal and patriotic business of every St. Lucian in the world, who has sung our national hymn and who was taught that no matter where he or she may roam, we must love, oh love, our island home. In Dr. Reynolds, St. Lucia has obviously produced another writer of the caliber, or of even deeper essence, the Nobel laureate V.S. Naipaul.
Dr. Anderson Reynolds is in the habit of giving us books that create thunder. I recall his very first novel, Death by Fire, as being one such book. Having read Dr. Anderson Reynolds' latest publication, No Man's Land, A Political Introspection of St. Lucia, I'm prepared to strongly recommend it to all persons who wish to have a clear understanding of the political institutions that we inherited. Anyone wanting to have an understanding of the political narrative at work at the moment, anyone who wishes to have an understanding into the fundamental problems that obstruct our development, this is a book that is really a must-read. And therefore, I look forward to the progress of the marketing of Dr. Reynolds' latest publication, which, as I said earlier, is filled with thunder and probably lightning bolts as well.
No Man's Land is a timely, unusual, and important publication by Dr. Anderson Reynolds. Its timeliness is due to the fact that Dr. Reynolds is releasing this analysis of St. Lucia's political culture and environment on the eve of a general election in St. Lucia. The book provides important reference points for the choices facing the St. Lucian electorate when they go to the polls in a few months. There will be many who disagree with Dr. Reynolds' analyses, and quite a few who will disagree vehemently with some of the conclusions he has drawn. But this literary dive into our politics will cause the reader to stop, think, and question. And that is always a good thing when deciding on the men and women who will lead our country for the next 5 years. What makes this book unusual is that it represents a real-time analysis of St. Lucian politics. The books that have been written on our island's politics in the past have been historical reflections of events and circumstances that took place several years prior to the publication of the respective books. Anderson Reynolds examines issues that recently took place, many of which are still being debated and prosecuted in the court of public opinion. The contents of this book are not events that you have to strain to recollect. They are contemporary events, and No Man's Land allows you to compare your understanding and interpretation of the cause and effect of these events with that of the author. This is an important publication because Dr. Reynolds addresses myriad significant subjects in this book. He treats with a range of critical topics, from the reform of our Constitution to the representation of his constituency. His analysis of the merits and demerits of our two most recent prime ministers will provoke a furious debate both inside and outside of both political parties. No Man's Land ends with a statement on the need for change, which I believe is the overarching theme that Dr. Anderson Reynolds is seeking to convey in this book. My point of departure with Dr. Reynolds, however, is his reliance on constitutional reform as the sole vehicle for this change. While strengthening our constitution and making the respective arms and institutions of government function more effectively and efficiently, with a dilution of the omnipotence of the Prime Minister, is certainly a good and necessary thing, there is also much that needs to be done with respect to changing the culture of our politics and the trajectory of our development. Hopefully, this will be the subject of the next book by Dr. Anderson Reynolds or some other St. Lucian author. Thank you, Dr. Anderson Reynolds, for another important contribution to St. Lucian literature and politics.
You have just heard from Dr. James Fletcher, who holds an Honours Bachelor of Science degree in Biochemistry from the University of Ottawa, Canada, and a Doctor of Philosophy degree in Crop Physiology from the University of Cambridge, England. He is a former Minister for Public Service, Information, Broadcasting, Sustainable Development, Energy, Science, and Technology in the government of St. Lucia. He served in that position from December 2011 to June 2016. In recognition of his work on climate change, he was highlighted by the organization Global Optimism in Profiles of Paris as one of the people who played a key role in creating the historic Paris Agreement on climate change. In 2019, James Fletcher was selected by the United Kingdom's Chevening Scholarship Program as one of 35 global changemakers who exemplify leadership on critical global issues. James Fletcher is the author of the book Governing in a Small Caribbean Island State and the Regional Strategic Action Plan for Governance and Building Climate Resilience in the Water Sector in the Caribbean. Thank you, Dr. James Fletcher. I just want to make a slight correction. This political introspection of St. Lucia is not a novel. It's nonfiction, and I like how Dr. Reynolds coined it. He said, it is what it is, but believe it, it is what it is. At this time, we have with us tonight another presenter who will give his remarks and make his comments on the novel, and that is Mr. Peter Lancico. Mr. Lancico was born in the Biography and describes, I hope I got that word correct, Biography, yes? And describes himself as a product of the SD Academy, a product of the A-level college at Mont Fortune, and a product of the grassroots system of education in Cuba. Mr. Lancico has served St. Lucia as an economist and as a diplomat in Cuba and the United States of America. He has also served the wider Caribbean as an economist and diplomat, most recently working for the 15 countries of CARICOM and for the Dominican Republic. Mr. Lancico says that his best achievement to date for the people of St. Lucia was when he introduced the Cuban Miracle Eye Project of St. Lucia. Over 7,000 St. Lucian patients traveled to Cuba for free eye surgeries while Mr. Lancico managed our embassy in Cuba, and many thousands more continue to benefit from the program now that the Cuban Miracle Eye Brigade is located in St. Lucia. Mr. Lancico is also an avid writer, known for his serious articles on St. Lucian politics. His first book will be published later this year. I now present to you Mr. Peter Lancico.
Thank you, my friend. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight, with you folks. Let me first take this opportunity to once again congratulate Dr. Anderson Reynolds for this beautiful piece of work that he's done. People who are aware of my following of Anderson will be fully aware that I am quite intimately acquainted with all his works. And as I made clear in my comments a few weeks ago, Anderson has now decided to move away from the storytelling of St. Lucian history, culture, and our economic history, and he's now delved into what I call the dechlorinated waters of St. Lucian politics. No Man's Land was introduced to me by Anderson, and he gave me the task to go through it and dissect it. They call me the hawk in these matters. And I put my hawkish eyes upon No Man's Land. And I'm very happy tonight to be able to say to the people of St. Lucia all over the world that we have a beautiful piece in No Man's Land. No Man's Land shows Dr. Reynolds in a new light, in a more serious light. His light has to date been good literary productions. He's a great storyteller, a very good. I think he's unparalleled in many respects in St. Lucia as a storyteller. I was very pleased when he decided to get to a new plateau and get involved in our dechlorinated waters of politics in St. Lucia. So I must also say that he's quite brave to have ventured there, as we know many St. Lucians prefer not to even venture into politics because it's not a very easy road. So again, congrats, Anderson, for having decided to cross the line, as we might say, in certain environments in St. Lucia, and having decided to give us such a serious piece of work on St. Lucian politics. These are my opening remarks. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Lancico. And I remember my granduncle was a beneficiary of that eye program in Cuba. He was one of those who went to Cuba to get his eye checked. He's 94 today. Yes. Okay, so this occasion is an auspicious one, not to be redundant in this cliche, but it's really great. Somebody jumping out, going out into the deep to fish out the truth that has to be presented to the country. Coming up is a production on the themes of No Man's Land. And just to remind you of the themes, it deals with issues of patrimony, sovereignty, nationhood, corruption, and political empowerment. So you will be seeing aspects of these themes in the upcoming presentation. It was directed and edited by Alexander Clark of MSOLE. MSOL.
Who must go, Robbie? Tell me.
I tell you what, Chasney must go. If y'all don't vote SLP and kick Chasney out, he go wreck the country like a runaway train.
Man, you don't know what you're talking about. Vote SLP? That same party voters saw me rejected 5 years ago because they didn't do anything for the country. It's just VAT, taxes and impacts they put on the Maliway. Crying out loud. They say they're the party of the Maliway. Man, give me a freaking break.
You have a point there. SLP think all what they have to do to win the election is to shout, Chasney must go. But Tanto, they better stop underestimating Chasney. They better go back to the drawing board and do the soul searching that will help them find out where they went wrong in 2016 when they allow a disintegrating UWP to beat them badly.
Yeah, but what has Chasney done for the country? Wait. Let me see. He has given half of Beaufort to the Chinese. He has placed rich foreigners first and Malawi St. Lucians last. He has denigrated and debased our sovereignty and our natural and cultural patrimony. And he has shown nothing but disregard and disrespect for the laws and institutions of the country. And Guy Joseph has turned Parliament into a puppy show. Some are even saying that he is the most corrupt politician in the history of the country. Need I say more? Man, mark my words. If we don't kick out Chasney in this election, there will be nothing left in St. Lucia worth fighting for.
Haha, Monsieur, the party has a play. How can you say UWP hasn't done anything for St. Lucia? Look how Chasney kept St. Lucia COVID-free. While in America, so many people were dying. They could not bury or cremate people fast enough. Under Chasney and before COVID every day was Christmas in St. Lucia. The supermarkets were always crowded with shoppers, and there was so much traffic and traffic jams in Beaufort. And castries that St. Lucia became New York. And to talk about the economy, before COVID, the economy grew by 2.8% compared to only 0.5% under the previous SLP administration. Let me repeat this again. When it lies, say it twice. Under Chasney, the economy grew by 2.8% compared to a mere 0.5% under SLP. Man, put that in your spliff and smoke it.
What nonsense is this? Chasney put the country in heavy debt and run the country broke. He himself said the country is broke. But you there talking about economic growth and
fellas, hold on. Hold on. This is exactly what is wrong with St. Lucian politics. You all there at each other's throat, jetting power while the politicians laughing all the way to the bank. All the way to the bank. With our money. Chasney, COVID-19, what have you, ain't the biggest problem the country faces. And switching back and forth like a yo-yo between UWP and SLP ain't go fix the country problems. One iota. Corruption, high unemployment, and escalating murder rate are all bigger fishes to fry than Chasney, Kenny, Philip J. Pierre, COVID-19. And in no man's land, I said in no man's land, a political introspection of St. Lucia. Dr. Reynolds make no bones about what's the biggest and most critical issue facing the country. He says that introducing constitutional reform to curb the power of cabinet and the prime minister and thus reducing corruption is the only way forward to long-term economic and political progress.
Dr. Reynolds, who? That man is a liberate. He in the pockets of Kenyan for the JPA. All those so-called intellectuals, let them put their brains to work, establish businesses that will employ people and help grow the economy. Use from Beaufort, but you get quiet. You won't say anything. Tell them what Kenny Anthony, another so-called intellectual, has done for Beaufort in his 15 years as Prime Minister and his 25 years as Beaufort South District Rep. Tell them that research has shown that Beaufort is the nation's third poorest district and it has the highest unemployment rate of all districts. Now put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Well, you know, I'm not the one to say that Dr. Anthony hasn't done anything for Beaufort. Of course, the man has done plenty for St. Lucia and Beaufort. But here's the thing. Kenny is a tired old man. Whatever he had in him to offer Beaufort and St. Lucia, he has already offered it. He doesn't have much left in the pipeline. So it's time to move on, and it's time for Beaufort to vote in a representative who is from Beaufort and who is passionate and dedicated to the cause of Beaufort. Not one like Kenny or worse than the Hammond Gill fella from Mikudo Library, wherever, who look even older and more tired than Kenny. These fellas care about Beaufort. They're simply using the Beaufort seat as a stepping stone. This is where I stand. Is it any wonder that in no man's land, Dr. Reynolds said that Beaufort faces a political leadership crisis?
What? Kenny did a lot for Beaufort and St. Lucia. It's just set and put past the man.
Hold on. Kenny Anthony, barely 70, and you telling me he's too old for politics? What will you say about Joe Biden, the American president?
There you all go again, refusing to acknowledge the elephant in the room. Crime, corruption, unemployment, constitutional reform. These are the most critical issues facing the country. Messieurs, fellas, stop letting politicians use you all as their tools. Consultio for your vote. Insist on what are they going to do for your community, for your district, for your country. Do not let them off the hook. Dr. Reynolds said it best in No Man's Land. He said, and I quote, election time, the politicians come begging voters as if it is a matter of life and death. They come like Jesus Christ, so humble, so sincere, so generous, so they have seen the errors of their ways, only to discard the people and treat them with disdain as soon as they get in power, engage in economic extraction at the expense of the masses, and then after 5 years come begging yet again for votes.
Wow, the elephant in the room. And many times we miss the point. What is the elephant in the room? You know, if I had a prize giving ceremony, I would ask you a question, and the person who answers the question correctly would win a prize. But I don't have a prize for you right now. I'll have to talk with the doctor. We're moving right along. We just want to remind you that towards the ending of our program, there will be a question and answer session, and you can actually type your questions in the chat, and we will answer those questions. Coming up, we have our author biography. Pay very close attention to this very important biography, because when you get that book, when you read No Man's Land, you would have to know exactly from which standpoint the author is coming. Biography of Dr. Anderson Reynolds. Anderson Reynolds was born and raised in Vieux-Fort, St. Lucia, to Seventh-day Adventists parents, Philomene née Francis and St. Bryce Reynolds. He is the seventh of 9 children. His mother was an enterprising housewife, and his father was a tailor who doubled as a farmer, beekeeper, and transporter of passengers and bananas. In August 1979, at the age of 21, he left St. Lucia for America to pursue a college education. He graduated from Louisiana State University, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in 1982 with a bachelor's degree in agricultural economics and a master's degree in the same field in 1985. In 1989, he received his doctorate degree in food and resource economics from the University of Florida, Gainesville, Florida. After graduation, he took a position as visiting professor of agricultural economics at the University of Guelph, Ontario. And in March 1991, after 1.5 years at the University of Guelph, he returned to the U.S. to work as a corporate economist with Southwestern Bell, St. Louis, Missouri. In March 1999, after 9 years with Southwestern Bell, he resettled in St. Lucia. Upon his resettlement, Dr. Reynolds founded Jacko Productions, a cultural and entertainment enterprise that seeks to encourage the artistic expression of St. Lucian culture and to promote that culture worldwide through its website, social media, the publication of books and magazines, the production of music and film, the management of artists, and the staging of musical, literary, and other cultural events. In St. Lucia, Dr. Reynolds has held the position of Senior Economist at the Eastern Caribbean Telecommunication Authority, ECTEL. He served as the president of the Southern Tourism Development Corporation, and he has served on the St. Lucia National Reparation Committee, the St. Lucia National Utility Regulatory Commission, and on the board of directors of the St. Lucia Livestock Development Company, Radio St. Lucia, the St. Lucia Tourist Board, and the Eastern Caribbean Collective Organization for Music Rights, ECHO. In recent years, Dr. Reynolds has emerged as one of St. Lucia's most prominent and prolific writers. Besides his 2 latest books, No Man's Land, A Political Introspection of St. Lucia, and the memoir, My Father is No Longer There, his first book, the novel Death by Fire, won the 2001 M&C Main Award for Literature. His second book, The Struggle for Survival, an Historical, Political, and Socioeconomic Perspective of St. Lucia, won a 2003 M&C Prize for Prose. And his third book, a novel titled The Stall Keeper, was the winner of the 2012 National Arts Award for Prose. Besides writing books, Dr. Reynolds is a regular contributor of feature articles to the nation's major newspapers, and he served as the chief editor and a principal writer for the Jacko magazine. His newspaper articles won him a 2001 MNC Literature Award for Creative Journalism, and his writings for the Jaco won the 2006 National Arts Award for Creative Journalism. Dr. Reynolds' books and journalistic pieces have established him as a foremost authority on St. Lucia's socio-economic and political history. And now, for the man of the hour, for this riveting, it is what it is, Dr. Anderson Reynolds.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks very much for joining the virtual book launch of No Man's Land, a political introspection of St. Lucia. Good evening, everyone. Let me start over again. Thanks very much for joining the virtual book launch of No Man's Land, a political introspection of St. Lucia. It is truly a global book launch because it is being viewed by people all over the world, or so I would like to think. The book is dedicated to Vieux-Fort, my hometown, and to all Vieux-Fortians, wherever you may roam. Vieux-Fort, you are my continued source of inspiration and dedication. May you fulfill your great destiny. Oftentimes we think wisdom is the domain of just the old, but sometimes the young display great wisdom. I'm taken aback by Kofi, the newest Jamaican reggae superstar. In all her interviews, she never fails to give thanks to those who opened the doors for her. In fact, some of her songs are specifically dedicated to honoring those who helped her along the way. So tonight, taking a page from Kofi, I want to say special thanks to Modest Downs, Peter Lancico, Julius James, and my brother, Dr. Prosper Reynolds, my intellectual sparring partner since childhood, for their reading of the manuscript and for providing many valuable suggestions and corrections from which the book benefited greatly. Regarding the launch, I would like to thank the actors of the skit. I think they did a great job dramatizing some of the main themes in the book. I'm talking about Asher, P.T., and Robbie. I also want to thank Dr. Fletcher for his insightful remarks. And of course, our moderator, the lovely Esther Matthew, whose participation has raised the event, I am sure you will agree, to new heights. All of these persons willingly came on board on short notice, and despite the challenges that COVID-19 posed. I would be very negligent if I didn't say a very, very special thanks to Peter Lancico, who in recent years has become my biggest supporter, and whose encouragement and confidence in me, and whose deep appreciation of my writing have convinced me that I'm on the right track in devoting the rest of my life to writing books. And I would be even more negligent if I failed to single out Alexander Clark of M-Soul, he's a business innovator, for a special thank you. He excitedly took over the planning and orchestration of the launch. He created all the promotional videos, in the process exciting me about the launching of my own book. Finally, I must thank Dr. Stephen King, who didn't contribute to the launch, neither did he help with the manuscript. But it was his impassioned interview on Choice Television on the need for constitutional reform that got me interested in the topic and indirectly inspired the writing of the longest chapter in the book, titled The Necessity of Constitutional Reform. So in the rest of my remarks, I will basically provide an overview of No Man's Land and a political introspection of St. Lucia. The book is divided into 4 parts. Part 1 speaks to the notion that the SLP slogan, Chasney must go, and the Chasney ultimatum, vote Labour or suffer the Alan Chasney train wreck, may not be sufficient to oust the UWP from power. That SLP may be making the mistake of underestimating Alan Chasney, that SLP need to do the soul searching required to find out what went wrong in 2016 when they allowed a disintegrating UWP led by a political novice beat them soundly at the polls. That however bad SLP may think Chasney is for the country, as was dramatized so very well, neither Chasney nor COVID-19 is the biggest problem facing the country. That to some extent Chasney is SLP and Kenny Anthony's creation. That to stand a better chance of returning to power, SLP need to present a new, inspiring vision for the country. That in these coming elections, voters must be vigilant and against and wary of politicians using them as their tool, while leaving their district and communities with little to show for their loyalty. So this was what part 1 was about, and it involved 2 chapters, chapter 1 and chapter 2. In terms of SLP soul searching, part 2, which spans 4 chapters, answers the question. Okay, let me back up a little bit because I'm supposed to do a bit of book reading while I'm providing the generalization, the overview. So part 1, I'll read briefly from the beginning of part 1, chapter 1, which is called By Hook or By Crook. As the 17th general elections of the universal suffrage era draws near, many St. Lucians, especially St. Lucia Labour Party supporters, are convinced that the Prime Minister, Alan Chasney, is ruining the country and has proven unfit to rule. However, it is troubling that SLP operatives seem to be using the notion that Alan Chasney is destroying the country as an ultimatum, vote Labour or suffer the Alan Chasney train wreck, and believe that a United Workers' Party defeat at the polls is a foregone conclusion, meaning lambasting the Prime Minister and highlighting his perceived misdeeds are the totality of what some SLP politicians may think they have to do to win the general elections. If so, will they not be guilty of underestimating Chasney's UWP and setting themselves up to suffer a repeat of their 2016 election defeat? It is also troubling that SLP is given the impression that the biggest problem facing St. Lucia is Alan Chasney, and getting rid of him will return the country to happy days. Equipped with the Chasney ultimatum, SLP may erroneously believe it does not have to undergo the soul searching required to ascertain what went wrong in 2016 and thus avoid repeating history when it allowed a disintegrating UWP to take over the reins of government, a party that has not found its footing since the mythical John Compton, considered the father of the country, gave up the party leadership in 1979. In 1997, indeed, the only time SLP has defeated a Compton-led UWP was in 1979 when the SLP ticket presented an unprecedented number of college-educated graduates, not least among them the great George Odlum, a candidate for St. Lucia's Man of the Century, credited with raising the political and social consciousness of the nation to unprecedented heights, a topic revisited in the forthcoming book. They call him Brother George, Portrait of a Caribbean Politician, by Reynolds and Lancico. So this effectively introduces part 1 of the book. So now I move to part 2. And let me just repeat. Part 2 is saying that in terms of SLP soul searching, in terms of SLP soul searching, part 2, which spans 4 chapters, answers the question: how was a disintegrating UWP, led by a political novice, able to oust a confident and well-standing Labour government? So to further introduce part 2, I'm going to read from chapter 5 on page 34. The question that begs for an answer is that if Alan Chastanet was by no stretch of the imagination an outstanding or gifted person, was of the politically incorrect race, was not born in St. Lucia, and regarding culture was barely a St. Lucian, and as such alienated from the vast majority of the population, how then did he become prime minister? How could the man accused of being unfit to run a hotel be fit to run a country? So part 2 deals with how did Chastanet become prime minister. Part 3, on the other hand, encompasses 7 chapters and investigates the Chastanet must go mantra and the Chastanet ultimatum and the many SLP accusations of Chastanet and his UWP to determine if the claims or accusations have any validity. So I'm going to introduce this section by reading from chapter 7, page 72. In June 2016, the UWP came to power following a surprise defeat of the incumbent SLP by 11-6 electoral seats. After Labour supporters had gotten over their disappointment of losing the elections, and after some St. Lucians, especially those who have been exposed to North American and European racism, had overcome their shock, shame even, of a white man presiding over their predominantly black country, they had probably consoled themselves with, well, this may be a blessing in disguise. For it's not like the Kenny Anthony-led Labour Party had set the world on fire. And Alan Chastanet, a wealthy, bona fide businessman, owner and manager of award-winning twin hotels, had run his campaign on the premise that he would manage the country as a business, and he would roll up his sleeves and get to work creating jobs and unleashing economic progress. So maybe, just maybe, Chastanet will be the hero able to go where Kenny Anthony, with all his academic and intellectual powers and rarefied regional stature, could not go, and bring home the elixir of national prosperity. Apparently, even Alan Chastanet may have seen himself as the hero who would restore the UWP and St. Lucia to the glory days of John Compton. When his father had discouraged him from accepting Compton's call to serve as tourism minister, and instead focused on his plans to start his own business, Alan said, "Dad, when a prime minister calls you to serve your country, you do not refuse unless there are grave health issues stopping you from accepting his offer." And that he could make a much bigger contribution to St. Lucia as Minister of Tourism than as manager of his father's 100-room hotels. Later, witnessing the demise of John Compton and the subsequent fall of the UWP government into a dysfunctional state, Michael Chastanet had pleaded with his son to resign from government, but Alan Chastanet refused because he reasoned to do so would be to dishonor the memory of John Compton and would set back the country's tourism industry. Yet 5 years later, one is made to understand, especially by Labour supporters, that Alan Chastanet is no hero. Many voices of anguish are castigating him as a villain who has to go. The reasons for this cry of anguish and castigation of Alan Chastanet as a villain have been well articulated. However, despite the multiplicity of voices decrying the UWP's administration's handling of the country, and pointing out it has undermined the nation and its citizens, some St. Lucians, especially UWP supporters, remain unconvinced of Chasney's villainy, and that an SLP administration would be any better. Whether an SLP administration would do better in terms of economic expansion, job creation, and unemployment, and in terms of crime reduction and other social and health indicators may be debatable. But what seems clear is that there has never been a previous administration that is perceived as being so much against the interests of the country. Therefore, despite the many voices that have weighed in on the subject, it may be useful to once again clarify, investigate why the Chasney-led UWP government is viewed in such bad light, forcing some St. Lucians, especially SLP stalwarts in particular, to pronounce it the worst government in St. Lucia's history. Some even saying that if Chasney's party were to win a second term, there may not even be a country left worth fighting for. Such serious accusations require investigation to determine, if nothing else, the extent to which the Chasney administration has outdone its predecessors in terms of villainy, lacking integrity, violation of public trust, incompetency, and not putting the interests of the countries first. So the rest of the book goes into an investigation of the claims against Chasney. So then this takes us to the final part of the book, which is titled The Need for Change. With the premise that neither Chasney or COVID-19 are among the biggest problems facing St. Lucia, Part 4 of the book analyzes some of the most serious issues facing St. Lucia, including unemployment, constitutional reform, and political leadership crisis, the Beaufort political leadership crisis in particular, and provides suggestions on how to fix these most pressing of problems. So I'm going to read a little bit from the last chapter, but to make it easier, I've carried the text to my speaking notes. So I'm just going to read from my speaking notes, which is basically what's in the book. In chapter 1, it was mentioned that SLP seems to be of the view that the biggest problem facing St. Lucia is Alan Chasney, that the country's problems begin and end with him, and that getting rid of his UWP government would return the country to the good times. So much so that SLP is threatening voters with the Chasney ultimatum: vote Labour or suffer the Alan Chasney train wreck. Well, the recent State of Urgency online poll conducted by Dr. James Fletcher begged to differ. Respondents cited unemployment as the most critical issue facing the country. The State of Urgency poll also suggested that voters view quality of leadership and corruption as two of the most critical issues facing the country, and that taking strong action against corruption and implementing constitutional reform were the two most important changes that the government needed to make to improve the way it operates. Therefore, consistent with my often repeated premise that our failure to adequately address the nation's most critical problems has more to do with will and desire than lack of resources or know-how, the quality and integrity of the country's political leadership may lie at the center of our inability to resolve many of our socio-economic problems. So this introduces part 4, which is called The Need for Change. It included 3 chapters: the Beaufort political leadership crisis, St. Lucia's persistently high unemployment, and the necessity of constitutional reform. So this brings my overview of the book to a conclusion. So now I will hand you over to our lovely moderator, Esther Matthew.
Thank you, Dr. Reynolds. Wow. You know, when this program started, I wanted to ask Dr. Reynolds, are you thinking of going into politics? But I have some questions here that I want to ask. And remember, this is the segment that will deal with the meat of the matter, hopefully. You can pose your questions in the chat, and of course, we will respond to them as best as we can. So, there is question number 1 for you, Mr. Reynolds. As Peter Lancico lucidly pointed out, no man's land represents a departure from your previous works. What led to the change? I had that say, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Actually, No Man's Land, I came about it almost by accident. Yes. Actually, I came by this book almost by accident. I mean, we were in the year of COVID. It was March. It was March. Myself, along with many other people I suspect, were in a slight depression. But then I wrote a first piece, The View for Political Leadership Crisis. It didn't paint Dr. Kenny Fanny in the best of light. So I got a lot of leaks from Labour supporters about the piece. So I said, hey, who told these people I am of the Labour Party? Mm-hmm. I am an independent person, and I think of myself as being objective. So it seems they were surprised, thinking I was in the Labour camp. They were surprised that I would come out seemingly against Kenny and Fanny, Anthony, and so forth. So I said, well, I need to write another piece to show these people that I'm not on anyone's side. I'm on the side of the country. So the second piece, which was the Chasney Ultimatum, which formed part 1 of the book, was really in defiance to those critics or criticisms. So by then I said, well, why am I'm there writing for free. The newspapers don't pay me. In fact, the last article I sent to one of the online newspapers, they considered it a political ad. Ooh. And they wanted me to pay for it to get printed. So instead of me getting paid for my writing, I was being asked to pay people to carry my articles. So I said, well, why don't I stop sending articles to the newspaper? Since I have so much writing already, let me stop sending articles to the newspaper and write some more to come out with a book. So this was how No Man's Land came about. It was a reactionary book, I suspect, because it was my defiance. It came out of a result of defiance.
But you've made so many poignant political points in the book. You've never thought of going into politics yourself?
Well, I was asked that when in my interviews with one of the television stations for the launch. Well, I've never been particularly interested in politics per se. But as I told the person at the television station, all of us cannot be politicians. There is a role for people like me to comment, criticize, and be an independent observer of the politics, of the economy, of the society. Because there are many takers to be Prime Minister of St. Lucia. People fight over themselves to become Prime Minister of St. Lucia. People fight over themselves to become district reps. For example, in Choiseul, we have 2 doctors fighting between themselves to be the Choiseul, to represent Choiseul in these general elections. But how many people are putting themselves up to write serious commentary on St. Lucian politics, economics, and society, and are willing to spend a year or so on a book which may not sell, from which they will never be able to get rich, or they may never be able to live on. There are not too many takers. So I see myself as occupying maybe a special role, a role for which there are not too many takers.
Not to stray, but when I hear you speak about these things, I'm thinking of agitation propaganda in drama, where you present issues that are biting in the country, and you want to cause some kind of stir among the people in the country. Was that part of your intentions?
Well, yes, because especially given the subject matter, the timing was perfect. Okay. Because if you put up such a book when there is no general elections coming, you may not get too much attention.
Okay.
So that, and one way that you know you're on the right track when you are writing, creating art, is when people get stirred up, people get vexed, angry, passionate. Then you know you are doing something right, and that you are being relevant. Because as an artist, as a writer, especially one climbing up there in age, because as you know, as you climb in age, you get less attention. The young people don't look at you; they see you as an old man. So to remain relevant in our society, you need to do some stirring up. What you produce as an artist needs to be relevant to the people, and so forth.
Well, you definitely stirred me up. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. In what direction do you think your book would likely sway voters in the coming elections?
Well, that's a very good question, I think. Well, one of my proofreaders told me it seems like most of what I'm saying in the book is directed to the Labour Party. So it's like the book seems to be a lot about providing free advice to the Labour Party. But of course, many Labour Party supporters, I don't think they saw it that way. So I am not sure exactly how it will sway voters. Because I didn't write the book to sway voters. I wanted to provide objective commentary, objective criticism to alert the country of the realities of our social, political, and economic realities. And once equipped with that information, you see, once voters have the right information, balanced information, objective information, I think they will make the decision that is best for the country.
Okay, in the book, you coined the Chasney Ultimatum, and you mentioned the SLP slogan. Could you expound on the relevance of these to the general elections?
Well, in terms of SLP, as stated in the book, based on the public meetings, comments on social media, from supporters, it seems I'm getting the impression that they think all what they have to do to win the elections is to shout as loud as possible, Chasney must go. And that if we put Chasney back in power, then sorry for us, they're going to wreck the country. So from the SLP perspective, this seems to be almost the strategy. But as pointed out in the book, it seems it's a strategy that will not guarantee them success at the polls. I think they need to come with a fresh, new vision for the country. They need to do some soul searching to find out what went wrong in 2016 so that they don't repeat history. And they need to address some of the very critical, crucial problems the country faces. Unemployment, constitutional reform, for example. St. Lucia faces a very high unemployment perennially. No matter how great the economy is doing, the unemployment rate is in the 20s, and the youth unemployment rate is is well above 30%. In the Great Depression, when the whole world was pitiful, the unemployment rate was about 25%. Yet it was a Great Depression, and the whole world was in calamity. Yet St. Lucia faces an unemployment rate annually, perennially, of 20% and above. So really, St. Lucia is in a permanent Great Depression.
Oh, Lord.
Yet our politicians are not telling us that. They are making us think that
All is well.
if they prop a few hotels on the beach here and there, that it will solve our unemployment problems. But even if and when they do prop those hotels, our unemployment rate remains high. So we need a more systematic, fundamental overhaul of our economy. It needs planning, and the book provides a way forward to achieving our full employment.
So let me put you on the spot then. What is your expectation or your election result prediction? What's your prediction of election results?
Well, from where I'm standing, I think it seems it will be very close.
It'll be no man's land.
I think it will be very close.
Okay.
Because I have not seen inspiring leadership, inspiring vision and mission from the SLP. I'm still not clear how they are going to attract the young people to come on board. And I think you need to excite the young people to come on board. If the accusations of Chasney, if there is validity to the accusations of Chasney as investigated in the book, then, and if they are very serious about getting rid of Chasney, then I think they need to do more than the Chasney ultimatum and the Chasney must go slogan.
Okay, I find the title No Man's Land very intriguing. What's behind the title?
Well, it went back to the first article I wrote when I was getting a lot of leaks from Labour supporters. So I realized, I said to myself, I'm really in no man's land because I'm not here to support Labour. I'm not here to support UWP. I'm here to see about the well-being of St. Lucia. And of course, Vieux-Fort, because I have a very warm, a very close connection with Vieux-Fort. So that's what I'm about. But by being objective, by being critical of both sides when there is a need to be critical, I've put myself in no man's land. I'm neither in a UWP camp, I'm nor a Labour camp. So that means there will be no gifts. No matter which party wins, there will be no gifts coming my way, and so forth. So I'm definitely in no man's land.
As I read some excerpts in this, It Is What It Is, I like the It Is What It Is, I felt my heart racing. And I felt myself saying, bon douce and miroro. So what was it like writing this book, meaning were you not apprehensive of the repercussions, such as victimization? I mean, you did mention your trip in Vieux-Fort, by both sides of the aisle that may result from scrutinizing both parties, SLP, UWP?
Yes, yes, there is a lot of concern. The possibility of victimization is very real. I go jogging on mornings, well, sometimes mornings, sometimes afternoons, and my jogging path is clear. It is clear, roughly around what time I go jog. I was even thinking, take care of these people start targeting me. So it was a worry. It was concern. I was very apprehensive, and so forth. More so than I have ever been vis-a-vis any of my previous writings. But I said to myself, if me, who is in my 60s, I don't have no firmly on my account. I don't depend on St. Lucia for income. I don't depend on any job for income, and so forth. If me, who is in such a position, cannot speak out for the benefit of the country, cannot represent the voiceless people, cannot make a stand and say, this is what it is, this is what I see as truths, regardless of which party gets offended. If me, who is in such a position, cannot be bold and brave enough to come out, who in St. Lucia will be able to do it?
I tell you.
So I saw it almost like my calling to engage in such writing. And after my international book tour in 2017, one of the things I came back with when I returned to St. Lucia was that from now on, my life is going to be about writing books.
Okay.
So I plan to write a book every 2 years. And right now I'm ahead of track because Peter Lancico and I have a book that was supposed to be published before No Man's Land. It's almost ready. So we don't know when we're publishing it, maybe later in the year. Yes. I don't know if I answer your question, but...
Yeah. In light of this, I have a question for Peter Lancico. But I also want to remind the public that you can post your questions in the chat. And as you post your questions in the chat, our panel will respond to your questions. But my question for you, Mr. Lancico, is this. What is your most important observation of No Man's Land? There are so many issues presented in this text, but what is your most important observation, or what affects you the most in this? It is what it is.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I think it is a very important question, and I'm happy for it because it is going to allow me to expatiate upon what I consider to be the most fundamental aspects of the book. Like I said in my opening remarks, No Man's Land is indeed a venture into no man's land. And it is written by a novice in politics, Anderson Reynolds. Anderson is a powerful writer, but when the two of us speak privately, he knows that I consider him to be a novice in politics. But there's nothing that looks like it's coming from the hands of a novice in no man's land, because Anderson did some serious research to have written No Man's Land, and of course he's been brave enough to express his opinions and the results of his research very nicely and very articulately, very forcefully in No Man's Land. And to respond to your question a little more directly, I will tell you that the most important for me, the most important aspect, or one of the most important aspects, because there's so many very important aspects of No Man's Land, one of the most important aspects, to respond more directly to your question, is the matter of the Cabot project in the north. Anderson explains beautifully to the people of St. Lucia what's going on with the Cabot project. And every St. Lucian, no matter which party you support, you got to forget about politics altogether and go and read about that particular aspect. So you need to buy the book for sure. Anderson explains to you in the Cabot Development Project, the Cabot Project, in a section of the book that he calls Putting Foreigners First. That section is followed by a section called Putting St. Lucians Last. Putting Foreigners First, where he addresses Cabot, is pregnant with matters that St. Lucians need to read. And I recall Anderson actually quoting quoting Dr. Ernest Healy in this particular book, and I want to go and read that quote from Dr. Healy on the matter of Cabot. Ernest Healy said, "Why do we need to use pension funds to finance the purchase of lands for a billionaire? What is the security against which the National Insurance Corporation investment was made? Is it true that the investor had been trying to buy this property for over 3 years and could not close on the property purchase? Does the investor love our National Insurance Corporation so much that the NIC was searched out to present such a sweetheart deal?" End of quote. Dr. Ernest Healy made that point in a public statement, and Dr. Reynolds has reproduced it in No Man's Land. This statement is pregnant with significance because clearly he is asking you, why do St. Lucian pensioners' money, $30 million of that money, why does that money finds itself in the hands of a so-called Canadian billionaire who's the one doing the project at Cabot, in our Cabot lands, a project, by the way, that involves many acres of St. Lucian land in the north, pristine
375.
lands, pristine lands for about 75 years in terms of the project duration. And Dr. Healy is asking, fundamentally, why do we need to use $30 million of taxpayers' money to assist such a billionaire? Isn't he a billionaire? I wanted to make that observation so St. Lucians will realize that No Man's Land brings some serious matters to bear for the analysis of our people.
Right.
And not too long ago, Adrian Augier, I think is now Dr. Adrian Augier, someone I consider to be an esteemed St. Lucian economist. Dr. Adrian Augier had to be thinking of the Cabot Cove project, not to mention the DSH project just across there, when he asked in Parliament and made certain comments to the effect that the government of St. Lucia is still basically giving away St. Lucian millions of dollars, taxpayers' resources, to foreign investors to come to our country to get involved in investments that St. Lucians can easily do. Dr. Reynolds is an economist. Dr. Reynolds can use such help from our taxpayers' resources to invest in projects in our country. But we continue to do what we have been doing for the last 60, 70, 80 years. Incentivizing foreigners to come to this country to get involved in projects that St. Lucians can get involved in. Which is why I have a very serious concern.
Yeah.
But that's for another story. I'm responding to your question. This evidently, a moderator, was the most important, one of the most important aspects that I found in No Man's Land. And I tell you, putting all politics aside, this book is an eye-opener.
Yes.
It needs to be read by every St. Lucian. Dr. Reynolds and I are not political friends for sure, but his book is going to be a serious injection into the minds of St. Lucians about our politics.
Get the book, people. Get the book. I have a couple of questions from our chat group, and it says, Dr. Reynolds, where did your passion for writing originate, and what's your advice to young and upcoming writers? It's a two-part question, and it's coming from Robbie. Where did your passion for writing originate, and what's your advice to young and upcoming writers?
Yes, I think it's coming out of my love for St. Lucia, my my passion, my love for the culture, the people, and the land. In fact, most of my books before No Man's Land, what sparked them were things that happened in my childhood that left a lasting impression upon me. So really, St. Lucia, you could say, is my muse, my source of inspiration. And in St. Lucia, I'm very much in love with Vieux-Fort. So when I'm outside of St. Lucia, I'm a St. Lucian. And of course, when I'm within St. Lucia, I'm a Vieux-Fortian. What was the second part?
And what is your advice to upcoming young writers?
My advice is you need to read a lot, a variety of things you need to read. And if you want to write, you have to start writing. I mean, it's a craft. It's something you get better at in the doing. So the most important thing, I think, about being a writer, the most important ingredient is whether you have the urge to write. The inclination. Once there is an inclination, then there is a way forward. You could start writing. You could join writers' groups. They are online. They are everywhere. And write every day if you can, and so forth. So it's the reading and the writing, and also joining writers' groups. You could take courses online, and so forth.
And the final knowing question. It's biting at the grips of your book, No Man's Land. How did you balance propaganda versus truth in your text?
Well, actually, I'm smiling, but it's a very good question because there is so much information out there. You go on Facebook, social media, and people on both political divide are putting out a lot of stuff. If you are SLP, you believe all criticisms laid at UWP. If you are UWP, you believe everything said about labor, no matter how outrageous. So there is a need for fact-checking. In my case, even if I think I know the material, the issues, I still try to read the newspapers, and so I did a lot of fact-checking, and I try to substantiate just about all the points I made in the book. I try to substantiate it with what came out in the newspapers, what was actually said, quoted, and so forth.
Wow. People, listen. You need to get this text. Get it for yourself. Get it for your children. Get it for your grandchildren. Every single line, every sentence in this text is going to make you hungry for more. And this takes us to the end of our program. And we just want to thank all of you for joining in. We thank you for your questions. We thank you for staying tuned. We thank Mr. Lancico for his participation, Dr. Fletcher, and of course, Dr. Anderson Reynolds for being a man for such a time as this, where truths and a whole set of issues are being raised in this text. No man's land. In 5 years, 10 years, 2 years, one in the next month, will we still have our little St. Lucia? So, you've been left with a lot of things to think about and to get the text. No man's land. Do not let it slip away. Make the purchase today. Thank you. Have a very good night and stay safe. God bless you.
wrong, huh?
No Man's Land is a no-holds-barred analysis of St. Lucia's current political environment by Anderson Reynolds. This timely dissection of the anatomy of St. Lucia's body politic by Dr. Reynolds is certain to ruffle a few feathers. Make sure you pick up a copy.
No Man's Land is a sword that cuts and pierces both sides of the political realm.
Anderson Reynolds' latest publication, No Man's Land, a political introspection of St. Lucia, is filled with thunder and probably lightning bolts as well.
I heartily embrace Dr. Reynolds' No Man's Land. It is an unapologetic, ferocious, take no prisoners masterpiece. In Dr. Reynolds, St. Lucia has obviously produced another writer of the caliber, or of even deeper essence, the Nobel laureate V.S. Naipaul.